The novel and film Psycho stem from a true story. Author Robert Bloch lived not far from the rural Wisconsin crime scene. In his novel, timid Norman Bates has murdered his mother, keeping the corpse around for company. A generation later, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre wove another version of the tale.
What happened was true. The most bizarre and brutal series of crimes in America.
A family of unemployed butchers lures travelers into their den of horror, an isolated farmhouse filled with the remnants of past visitors. One of the lunatics, Leatherface, wears a mask made of human skin and prefers women's clothes.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After you stop screaming.
The truth is not only stranger than fiction, it is more appalling. The inspiration of these movie madmen was not young and handsome, nor a squealing giant, but a timid little farmer. Edward Gein had lived most of his life in a farmhouse with his mother and his brother Henry outside of Plainfield, Wisconsin. His father died when Ed was a child. Bible-pounding Mother Gein always warned her sons that all women were sinful. Just stay on the farm. Ed considered her a saint. As an adult, Ed's brother Henry started to disagree with this view of Mother. He told the now-grown Ed that he was too attached to their mother, a mama's boy. Henry Gein died shortly after that during a forest fire. Ed was the last person to see him alive. Mother Gein died after a series of strokes in 1945. Ed sealed off her bedroom and the parlor as a weird shrine, living only in his kitchen and his bedroom, immersing himself in books about anatomy, Nazi atrocities, South Sea Island cannibals, and true crime stories. A government subsidy meant he no longer had to tend the farm. Occasionally, he hired himself out to his neighbors. Some of Plainfield's 700 other residents called him Weird Ed. He would give them a funny smile at odd times, but nobody paid much attention to the harmless 5'5" farmer. According to Ed, he convinced another local farmhand named Gus to help him with some work. That work was grave robbing. Old Gus and Ed dug up the bodies of women and carried them back to Ed's farmhouse. Ed told his friend only that he was doing experiments. Few people ever entered this lonely farmhouse. Brave boys would try to peer into the house because Ed said he kept shrunken heads in there. Ed always chased trespassers off his land. The house became unimaginably filthy with layer upon layer of waste, slop, and unidentifiable clutter. Cheap pictures of Jesus on one wall and a mask of human skin on another. Comic books and volumes on embalming. Children's toys, and human bones. One night in 1954, Ed walked into a saloon in nearby Pine Grove, deserted except for the owner, Mary Hogan, who physically resembled Ed's mother, but whose body attitude reflected Ed's image of a scarlet woman. Ed shot her with a .22, packed the 51-year-old woman onto a sled, and carted her back home. Ed continued his lonely life, unmolested by outsiders or sanity. Occasionally, local families would ask him to babysit. He was always there to help out. In November 1957, Ed hung around Warden's hardware store in Plainfield. Beatrice Warden was a buxom woman whose shape reminded Ed of his mother. Mrs. Warden's son, Frank, was deputy sheriff and unofficial fire chief. Eddie mentioned in passing that he'd have to buy antifreeze for his truck. On the first day of hunting season, Plainfield's men were out chasing deer. When Frank Warden came back to his mother's store, he found her cash register missing. So was his mother. There was a blood stain on the floor and a receipt for antifreeze. The death of Beatrice Warden appeared to be utterly senseless murder. The sheriff drove out to the Gein farm, finding the shed unlocked. Hanging from the rafters, upside down, was the headless body of Beatrice Warden, slit open like a butchered animal. Gein quietly went into custody, and the full horror of his house came to light. Investigators prowled through the rooms of the filthy Gein home. On the stove was a fresh human heart in a pot, ready to be cooked and eaten. The tops of skulls were hollowed out, used for drinking bowls like the ancient Vikings. Human organs were kept in the icebox. Furniture had been reupholstered with human skin. In a box were Ed Gein's collection of female sex organs, cut from the corpses he had dug up. There were 9 face masks peeled from the heads of the dead. One was identified as Mary Hogan. Vests and leggings sewn together from the skin of cadavers were found. As near as anyone could reckon, there were a total of 15 bodies. In custody, Ed Gein quietly admitted to his ghoulish habits. He only vaguely remembered killing Beatrice Warden and Mary Hogan, and indignantly resented the implication that he had stolen Warden's cash register. He merely wanted to see how it worked. Plainfield suddenly became infamous. Reporters, scavengers, and tourists flocked to the town that boasted a real-live ghoul, a man who dug up corpses, ate their organs, and dressed in handmade vests of human skin under the light of the moon. One entrepreneur bought Gein's truck and exhibited it throughout the Midwest for morbid curiosity seekers. Another man planned to turn the Gein farm into a permanent museum of horrors, charging admission for the privilege of being revolted. The farmhouse mysteriously caught fire. Local authorities took their time to get to the scene. That wasn't a surprise. The fire chief was Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden, who had seen his mother's body hanging like a gutted deer in Ed Gein's farmhouse. Ed Gein was put under observation at the Wisconsin State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Over the years, psychiatrists questioned Gein like a prized trophy. One test had the patient explain familiar sayings. When the doctor said, "A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush," Ed Gein chuckled and said, "If you have a bird in your hand and you squeeze it too hard, you might kill it." The doctors decided Eddie wasn't quite ready for the outside world. He died of old age in 1984. The nurses all agreed that he seemed like a nice, harmless little man.